The Italian film industry is collapsing. Audiences have abandoned Italian cinema, flocking to foreign movies instead. Producers are seriously considering shutting their doors for good. In a desperate move, they turn to one single actor, begging him to save the industry and draw audiences back to Italian films. He steps up, and he actually becomes one of the main reasons the Italian film industry survives. But in return, he spends the rest of his life under fierce attack from critics who dismiss his movies as silly and worthless. Today, I'm talking to you about the Prince of Laughter, Totò. Well, I have a confession to make. Even though I've watched movies from all over the world, Italian cinema and Italian actors hold a special place in my heart. Let me tell you the forgotten story of an actor who saved the Italian film industry during its darkest hour, the iconic Italian star, Totò. Our story begins right after World War II. The Italian economy is going through the worst crisis in its history, and the average Italian citizen simply doesn't have the luxury of spending money on something like the cinema. And even if they did, they weren't watching Italian films, they were watching American ones. Why? Because when the United States liberated Italy from German occupation, they signed agreements with the Italian government in exchange for loans. One of these agreements essentially forced Italian cinemas to screen a massive quota of American movies all the time, leaving only a tiny slot for Italian films. It was a form of cultural invasion. Italian filmmakers suddenly found themselves going head-to-head with Hollywood itself. And even if a brave producer decided to take a risk, where would they film? Most of the movie studios had burned to the ground during the war. Yet, from the womb of suffering, creativity is born. This era gave rise to the Italian neo-realism movement, which beautifully captured the everyday struggles of ordinary Italians. They didn't care about Hollywood glamour or fancy studios. All that mattered was a good story. They filmed right on the streets, bringing us masterpieces like Vittorio De Sica's Bicycle Thieves, 1948, Roberto Rossellini's Rome Open City, 1945, and Federico Fellini's La Strada, 1954. These films were a revolution and impacted cinema worldwide. But despite their monumental importance, they just couldn't attract a large enough audience to help producers recoup their massive losses. The truth is, neo-realist films were incredibly bleak. They reflected the harsh reality Italians were already living every single day. Post-war audiences were depressed. They just wanted to laugh. And this is where the hero of our episode, Totò, comes in. Totò was one of the biggest names in Italian comedic theater, boasting overwhelming rock star-level popularity in his hometown of Naples. Producers approached him hoping to use his massive fame to drag theater audiences into the cinemas. Initially, Totò was hesitant. Before and during the war, he had a few failed attempts at film that left him frustrated, making him retreat back to the theater. But with the producer's relentless persistence, Totò returned to the big screen. His comeback hit like a bomb. There was an unprecedented public turnout. People rushed to theaters just to see his movies, and critics quickly dubbed him the Italian Buster Keaton. However, this critical honeymoon didn't last long. Critics soon decided that his massive popularity was unearned. To them, his movies were just silly, making people laugh for the sake of laughing, which they felt undermined the prestigious neo-realism movement that was producing far more important art. This war between Totò and the critics would last for almost his entire life. What the critics conveniently ignored was one crucial fact. Without Totò's box office hits, producers would never have recovered from their post-war bankruptcy, and they wouldn't have been able to fund those very neo-realist films the critics loved so much. Totò's presence was absolutely vital to the survival of Italian cinema. Despite the permanent smile on Totò's face, his past was deeply tragic. His real name was Antonio Clemente, taking his mother's surname. His real name should have been Antonio de Curtis, but he was denied this because he was the illegitimate son of Marquis Giuseppe de Curtis, a nobleman who refused to acknowledge him. The Marquis left him to endure a harsh, painful childhood in one of the poorest neighborhoods of Naples. Throughout his teens and young adult life, Totò fought desperately to get his lineage officially recognized. In 1933, he actually got another nobleman, Marquis Francisco Maria Gallardi Focus, to legally adopt him in exchange for a lifetime pension, just so he could technically be the son of a noble. That just shows you how deep the wound in his heart was. Finally, after a long legal war, a Naples court ruled in 1945 and 1946 to acknowledge his noble lineage, granting him a massive list of titles that were officially added to the Italian nobility registry. His legal name essentially became a full paragraph: Antonio Grifo Focus Flavio Angelo Ducas Comneno Porphyrogus Gagliardi de Curtis di Byzantium. Along with the name, he inherited titles like Prince, Count Palatine, and Duke. Documents even proved his descent from ancient Byzantine dynasties like Focus and Comneno. But in a hilarious twist of irony, after wasting years trying to prove he was a noble, Italy passed a new constitution that entirely abolished the legal recognition of noble titles. 83. But while he may have lost his title as the Prince of Byzantium, the people crowned him the Prince of Laughter. Totò didn't just save producers, he also boosted the careers of legendary actors when they were just starting out. A great example is the 1958 film Big Deal on Madonna Street. This movie starred some of the greatest Italian actors of all time, like Marcello Mastroianni, Vittorio Gassmani, and Claudia Cardinali. Back then, these legends were basically rookies, and the producers didn't trust that they could carry a film on their own. So they called in Totò to play a very small, almost cameo-like role. However, they demanded that Totò's face be plastered on the movie poster larger than anyone else's, tricking the public into thinking it was his movie. It worked perfectly. The film was a smash hit, launching the careers of those three actors and kicking off the comedy Italian style movement that eventually conquered the United States. Totò also repeatedly supported the brilliant actor Nino Manfredi in his early days, most notably in the 1966 film The Treasure of San Gennaro, just 1 year before Totò passed away. Throughout his life, Totò formed several iconic comedic duos, but the most important was with Italian actor Aldo Fabrizi. They made 5 films together, the absolute best being Cops and Lobs, Guardie e Ladri in 1951, which features one of Totò's greatest performances. Their dynamic relied entirely on contrast. Totò was skinny, small, and wildly energetic, while Fabrizi was large, heavy, and calmly composed. His second and most commercially successful duo was with Peppino De Filippo, one of Italy's greatest comedic actors. Unlike his dynamic with Fabrizi, Totò and Peppino's chemistry was built on total harmony. They shared the same comedic style and rhythm. Together, they made 13 films, including some of Totò's biggest commercial hits like Totò, Peppino e la Malafemmina, 1956, and La Banda degli Onesti, 1956. Now, regarding Totò's health, there is a mind-blowing fact that proves what an absolute genius of an actor he was. For most of his cinematic career, Totò was almost entirely blind. Yes, almost blind. When he was young, a boxing injury damaged his retinas. Later, in 1952, Totò was shooting Totò e Color, Totò in Color, the very first color film in Italian history. It was a massive cinematic event, but the lighting equipment needed to shoot in color back then was incredibly primitive and had to be blasted directly into Totò's eyes. This severely damaged his retinas, eventually leaving him completely blind in bright light. He could only see in dim, near-dark lighting. Everyone thought his career was over, but they were dead wrong. On set, Totò would wear thick black sunglasses behind the scenes, take them off when the cameras rolled, and act completely blind. He trained his co-stars to physically guide him and memorized the layout of the set by heart, just like a stage actor. That's why you'll notice specific background actors repeating in all his movies. They were his guides, helping him hit his marks. Amazingly, if you watch any of his films from 1952 to 1967, you will never, ever be able to tell the man is blind. He was incredible. In his final days, he suffered multiple heart attacks, but in 1966, a year before his death, he decided to drop one last surprise to completely shock his critics. He delivered one of the greatest, most profound performances of his career in The Hawks and the Sparrows, widely considered one of the most important philosophical and political films in Italian history. Before I wrap up this episode, I want to leave you with a fascinating little piece of trivia. One of the directors heavily influenced by Totò is the legendary Italian filmmaker Giuseppe Tornatore, the man who directed Cinema Paradiso. If you didn't notice, the main character in that movie is nicknamed Totò, and the story takes place right at the peak of the real Totò's fame. Not only that, but in the pivotal scene where the cinema catches fire and Alfredo loses his sight, the movie playing on the screen is Due Cuori tra le belve, a movie starring Totò which was released in 1943, the exact time the story is set. Tornatore loved that specific movie so much that he even recreated one of its scenes in another of his masterpieces, The Legend of 1900. It's the famous scene where the main character plays the piano on a ship during a violent storm, sliding left and right across the room. Toto did that exact scene comically back in 1943, and Tornatore recreated it in 1998, proving that Toto's legacy lives on. In the end, I hope you enjoyed this episode and that I was able to introduce you to a cinematic legend you might not have known about. Stay tuned for part 2 of this episode, where I'll share my personal top 10 list of the best Totò movies. Don't forget to like and share to get all the latest updates. But most importantly, stay lazy and watch great movies.